What if you were able to sit down for lunch with some of the greatest leaders in the world? What would you ask? What would they say? Welcome to the Linch with a Leader podcast, where you're invited to join us in learning the spiritual principles behind big success. Here's your host, Mike Linch.
Welcome to episode 241 of the Linch with a Leader podcast, where we sit down with some of America's greatest leaders, find out how they have learned to lead with their faith out in front. If I've never met you before, my name is Mike, and it is my honor to welcome you on this leadership journey as you and I are seeking to be the leaders that we were created to be in the spaces and places that God has put us. And boy, have we had some just outstanding guests this year. And just coming off this last episode with Dr. Alicia Britt Sholey talking about the night is normal, and we all walk through nights, we all walk through seasons that are dark, and our guest today has walked through a season that was dark. Nadine Sophia Evans Oliver has lived a story that is really even at times hard to even capture. And I tell you what, man, when you talk about somebody that has been through adversity and somebody that has been through one of life's greatest struggles and come out on the other side, I tell you what, Nadine, she fits that bill. She's a mom. She is also a senior special counsel in United States Securities and Exchange Commission, but she's a survivor of losing her husband while she's trying to raise her kids, and the journey that they walk through and the story that they had together. And now in this new season of life, her new story today is about inspiration. Today is about letting you know, not only is the night is normal, but the sun comes up again the next morning. You may not know Nadine, but I promise you this, you will know her at the end of this episode. So I don't know where you're listening from today. I don't even want you to pull out a notebook. I don't want you to pull out a piece of paper. I want you to just rest in, listen in, because this, if she can get through what she got through, you can get through what you're going through. So listen to this amazing story of Nadine Sophia Evans Oliver, and just say at the end of it, man, God is good even when it's hard. Can't wait for you to return with me here in a few minutes after this interview. Well, Nadine, thank you so much for joining me in this episode of Linch with a Leader. It's such an honor to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, and good morning.
We got connected by a mutual friend of ours, Dana Doris. You guys went through Leadership Cobb together, and I've heard so many incredible things about you. We've had one phone call, so we're really getting to meet for the first time today. This is awesome.
We are.
Well, you have had an amazing journey. Growing up, you were up in New York and then spent time, Dana was telling me, overseas studying abroad at 15 in Japan. What was that like to leave the U.S. and go to Japan on your own to be over there? What was that experience like for you?
It was awesome. When I was in high school, I did a project called the Westinghouse National Research Project, and I was a semifinalist. And so I was exposed to a lot of politicians in New York during those ceremonies. And at the time, Mayor David Dinkins, his office later contacted me and said, we have this program called Youth for Understanding that we're working with. And would you consider being an exchange student to Japan? And my answer has always been, why not? I went to Japan at 16, 15, loved it, lived with a family. My host sister's name was Yuka, and my host mother and my host grandmother were actually born on my birthday, which is November the 9th.
Wow.
So it was a great coincidence. And my parents were senseis in Japan. And my host sister went to boarding school, which was normal because education is the key. And so she transferred to a day program for me. And we would take the train every day for 2 hours to school. And I loved it. I didn't get a chance to really learn a lot of Japanese. It was a very quick program. We went to California for 5 days for orientation, and I learned what I could. Important things such as watashi wa Nadine desu, and asking where the bathroom is, and things of that nature. But it was great. What's interesting is that even though you may not speak a language, you're able to still communicate very well with people using other talents and skills. And so it was great, a great summer. I'll never forget it. And it really shaped and formed a lot of my belief systems and who I am today.
Well, on that note, what are some things you learned in that you go, I would have never thought I needed in life? What were some things you learned as a teenage girl going over for this amazing program that you go, man, I look back today and I still use those things that I learned?
My people skills. I was living in Japan where a lot of people from different countries come and they teach English. And so it was like a little United Nations. My mom was a secretary at the UN for the majority of her life. And so I was exposed to people from different countries on a daily basis every time I went to see her after work. So I was used to that multicultural feel. Also living in New York City, being a melting pot. My parents are from the Jamaica West Indies. I'm a first generation American. So I was always exposed to culture and just being able to take that in and assimilate and be able to interact with people. And that level of diplomacy that I learned at such a young age has still stuck with me. I always say to people, I can talk to a wall, I can talk to anyone. And I love talking to people. And so those skills learned at that age have really served me well.
I love that. What were some things looking back your parents did right? You got a house full of kids now. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. What were some things that your parents, maybe unknowingly, they just did right in raising you?
So my parents divorced at a really young age. So it was primarily my mother and really didn't spend a lot of time with my dad until to live with him prior to attending law school. My mom was like, you know what? I don't have a lot, but I'm going to give you a lot of love. And she didn't go to college until we were getting ready to go to college, my sister and I. And so she would do Hunter College at night when I was finishing up my high school degree. So my parents weren't like, we have a lot of information to give you. We have a lot of financial opportunities. They were like, we have nothing. So we're going to just, work as hard as you can and do the best you can. And so I remember at a really young age, my mom would always check my math homework. And on the weekends when my dad would come down from Connecticut, where he was living during the week, he would always make up three, math problems and, like multiple hundreds and different things of that nature. And we'd work on math. And so we always were doing schoolwork and we didn't have access to other resources, but we just worked really hard. And so I learned at a young age that just be a good person, work really hard. And my parents gave us unconditional love. I remember that like we grew up really humbly, but what I really remember was that I always felt loved. And I think it was that deposit of love in my heart and my spirit, which has allowed me to be the person I am today, to have the children that I have and to love unconditionally and to be able to be married and to love my spouse the way I think God intended us to love spouses. And I know it's different because my girlfriends always say to me, no one loves their husbands the way you love your husbands, Nadine. And I think back to that, and I think it was that love that I received at a young age.
It's so funny. Your parents, so many of us, our parents just unknowingly did things. They just did what they knew. They didn't read books about it. They didn't go to courses about it, but they made those deposits and poured into you. And then you go on to Dartmouth and then end up going to Vanderbilt Law School. Did you know leaving high school, I am going the law route? Did you always know that's what you were going to do? Or what were you thinking at that time?
It's really a funny story. So, we were latchkey kids, lived in an apartment building in New York City. And so the one opportunity for us to kind of get outside was, because it was really dangerous in our neighborhood, so we didn't really go outside a lot, was to check the mailbox, which was on the bottom floor. And I remember I'd put my little clip-on earrings on because my ears weren't pierced, and I would do my little braids, and I'd get all dressed up. And I think someone one day remarked to me, why are you so dressed up? You're just going to the mailbox. You're just taking the elevator down 4 stories. And I was like, you never know who you're going to meet. You may meet Ronald Reagan or something like that. Because I remember Ronald Reagan was public figure at that time and we were watching television. I just remember that always stood up because whoever asked me that question was laughing. And I was like, why is it funny? Like, I really may meet him. So in my little mind of optimism, I must have thought, hey, he may be coming here.
That's right.
Brooklyn, New York. And if I'm not dressed with my clip-on earrings, what kind of impression would I make? So at the time, I think that I, used to remember fondly telling people that I wanted to be a politician or a hairdresser, and the faces that people looked at me when I said politician, I figured that's probably not a good answer. And so I gravitated towards law, if I could really be honest with you, because growing up in the inner city of Brooklyn, New York, I grew up in Crown Heights, which was, nestled between Hasidic Jews and West Indians. There where we had racial riots and things of that nature. And my mom, as I told you, didn't have a higher degree, and my dad was gone, and my parents were divorced. And I just remember situation after situation my mom was taken advantage of as a female, taken advantage of because she didn't know, taken advantage of for so many different things. I would be on the bus with her and I would see someone like picking her pocket and I say, Mommy, he's picking your pocket. And I'd been held up at gunpoint with her, getting food after school. And we just had so many different experiences. And I felt so helpless
Mm.
in that regard. And I thought, if I get to read and understand rules and regulations, then I can stand up for my mom and then I won't have the same issues growing up. And so, really, I kind of pivoted and really adopted the belief that I could arm myself with education and arm myself with understanding so that I could be better in those situations as I got older. It was my lifeline. And then my other lifeline was that at 13, I gave my heart to Christ and I was
Mm.
baptized. And I would spend my weekends listening to a little tape. I went to the Brooklyn Tabernacle. That was my church in New York, and I got baptized there. And back then cassette tapes, my kids are
Yeah.
like, what is that? DVD is, and that's okay too. But I had this little Brooklyn Tabernacle tape that someone must have given us. And when my mom was robbed with guns when I was with her, she picked me up after school and she's like, do you want to get something to eat? And it was like a treat. It was a Friday right before Christmas. She had just cashed her paycheck and all she had was cash because she was going to go pay our rent and we didn't have anything. And they grabbed her handbag and it was kind of like, I mean, like what the worst fate ever. Like the one day
Mm.
you cash your check that you have your money and literally, they threw the drink in her face and they ran out and she just was sobbing uncontrollably. So the cops get there. They're like, we can't find anything, same situation. And I remember we had a distant uncle and he went to the Brooklyn Tabernacle and he reached out to them and they gave us money for our rent.
Wow.
It was food so that we could eat over Christmas. I don't remember there being any presents and we didn't care. And we weren't a big present family because we grew up with very little, but we were just so thankful that we were going to make it. I remember that time period of being very scared and not really knowing. And we didn't really have heat because our landlord wouldn't give us heat. Just growing up that way. I remember God was there and God was
Mm.
present. And through these people, we were able to have food and pay rent because I don't really know where we would have gone. Like, if I'm really being honest with you, we didn't have any place else to go. And so that really introduced an avenue for us starting to go to church. And so that was really great. I mean, I had grown up, if I can, just kind of go backwards, I'd grown up being Seventh-day Adventist. So as I said, my parents are Jamaican and Seventh-day Adventism is a big form of religion in the West Indies. And so I grew up that way. But for me, it was more like the way I grew up, just not to offend anyone. It was like, you can't eat pork, after Friday, sun goes down, you can't watch TV. So I'm sitting here like, I can't watch TV. And I'm like 5. So, and I can't eat pork, which is fine because whatever. And that's why I had the clip-on earrings. So I couldn't get my ears pierced. So I didn't really have a relationship with God where I personally was raised and the way that I went to church. It was more like doctrines that kind of, really ruled and I was told what I shouldn't do, but I never really knew who God was. And the Brooklyn Tabernacle was just a different place for me. And as I went to high school, I became part of the youth choir. And that was really where I gave my heart to God. And through the tape I mentioned, I would listen to the singers and the choir singing. And I was like, what are they singing about? And I remember I asked God, like, I want to understand this happiness and this love that they're talking about because we were, without anyone. It was just me, my mom, and my sister. Those are really hard times. Those were really
Mm.
hard times, and it was scary. And it was then that I started to rely and build my relationship on God at that very young age.
I love how they entered the story too. They entered the story as a help to you and your family, but that ended up opening up your heart to what Jesus had for you. Where do you think you would be today if that hadn't happened? If you had never run across Brooklyn Tab, if they hadn't have stepped in when they did, and Nadine would have just gone on and gotten her law degree and done all you've accomplished in life that we're going to unpack, what do you think would have changed about you without Jesus in your heart?
Well, I think that God would have continued to chase me because I think that
Mm.
I've always had moments in my life where maybe I wasn't exactly doing exactly what I should be doing. And God always chased me. It's like, why are you waking me up in the middle of the night? And I feel like God chases you. And I think sometimes people just don't listen. But for me, God would always chase me and has continued to chase me in my life to kind of redirect me. I think on the times that maybe I didn't even realize I wasn't on the right path, even though I've kind of always been a good kid and done the right thing. But the times that maybe I wasn't heeding to his direction or listening to him, God has continued to be a force in my heart and my life and has put Christian soldiers around me that had given me words of peace and words of wisdom. And so I'm so thankful for that calling.
I love that. You know, it's so funny. Dana was telling me, she said, make sure you talk to her about the Securities and Exchange Commission and how many applicants there were when she put in. So you began to work your way up in the law world, beginning at King and Spalding in Atlanta. And then now you're with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And what did you do to separate yourself from the thousands and thousands of applicants who had put in? What were some things you did that you went, man, this, I don't even know if I knew I was doing it, but I was able to separate me out from the crowd?
Absolutely. So right before the SEC, I was actually started out of law school at King and Spalding, which was phenomenal. Thankful for that experience. Greg and I traveled all over, came back to Atlanta, and then later ended up right before the SEC being in Austin and Byrd, which was where I met some of my dearest Christian soldiers in my life. And I'm thankful for that experience and that loving environment. So when I was at the SEC, one day I was at work really early, like 7:45, and there was a legal colleague of mine, not at the firm, that was then the city attorney for the city of Atlanta, and she happened to be across street at the coffee shop, and she was going to be meeting with some people at the firm, and she had some extra time, and so she was like, "Is anyone in the office?" And no one's really there at 7:45. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm here. I'll come meet you." And so we were just friendly and speaking, and she told me that she was looking for an attorney to do a secondment in the city of Atlanta legal department from the firm. And so she was there to ask them which attorneys they could lend out to them because they didn't have the budget, but they needed the work. And so it was nothing that I had really ever done before. And I was like, I'll do it. And she was like, you'll do it? And I was like, why not? Like, I'm always open to the possibility. Why not? And I think it's like the little kid in me that's like, I'll do it, and raises your hand. And so that was really, for me, the distinguishing step that made me a top candidate from my SEC experience. I got into the city of Atlanta, worked with the legal department, which was great. Very different working for a municipality, especially the city of Atlanta. So busy, so many moving parts. And it was like, drinking from the water hose, but I loved every minute of it. And I took in every single detailed experience. It was different things than what I was doing at the firm, and I learned from it. And months later, when I was thinking about what I was going to do, everyone's like, well, do you want to be partner? Do you want to be of counsel? And none of those things seemed interesting to me at that particular time. And I started looking and seeing, what opportunities there were out there. And, to kind of shorten the story, I ended up applying for the SEC, and I applied for multiple job positions. And so I get a call for this particular position, and it ends up taking about a year for the process to come to an end, which is very, very long. But when it's something that, at that particular time, that was their hiring process, I was told during the process that there were north of like several thousand candidates for my one position. I think what stood out was that I had big firm experience, I had municipality experience. And I went in there and I really tried to structure the interview to let them know why I was going to be the best person. The job was in DC. It was created pursuant to Dodd-Frank, and they had looked for 2 years to find someone with municipal securities expert experience that I got at the city of Atlanta. They couldn't find anyone in DC. And so they were allowing the candidate that got the job to be able to take it in any city where there was a regional office. Where Atlanta has an SEC regional office, I'm still currently an employee of headquarters, but I do have an Atlanta office that I report to locally. And so it was a great experience. I just want to just highlight how God was present through that year process. I just wanted to say, I think that sometimes as Christians or people that are believers, we don't share our stories and our struggles. And we just say, oh my gosh, I got it. It's so easy. Praise God. He's so awesome. But we never tell about the stories and the struggles. And I think it's our responsibility to share the ups and downs, the good and bad, so that we can encourage other people that are in their struggles to know, like, this is normal. This is okay. It doesn't mean that you don't get to win. It doesn't mean that God is not blessing you. It doesn't mean that God is not walking with you. And so I had two very pivotal moments in my interview process. My daughter, Isabella, was born with an eye condition. And so she had to have a surgery. And it coincided exactly with like my 6-month next level interview. And I remember I was at St. Joseph's with her eye doctor. Greg was with me, my husband, and we were there. We got her IV set up, and, they're giving her dolls and all these treats. And clearly she's nervous. And I'm looking at the time and they're running behind. So really I had, all that is predetermined on time and I could not change my SEC interview. And so it coincided that my interview time was starting and she had not been taken back into surgery. So I had to leave her. And it took
Mm.
everything in me to walk down that hallway. And I went to the parking garage, started my phone up, and did this conference call in the dark in the St. Joseph's parking lot, hospital lot. And I did this call and I'm sitting here and I have sheets of paper everywhere and I'm just trying to focus and I'm just thinking about her and just hoping that my husband was able to distract her because I had been there with her. She had spent a year of her life at CHOA and then the Aflac Cancer Center for her issue with her eye. And so I'd always been there with her through all those appointments and surgeries. And so I had to leave. So as a mom, just kind of think about that, like your baby is being rolled into surgery and I've got this epic next round interview. And so that was the one piece. And I remember my final interview, I was taking it from the basement of our home. And right before I was scheduled to go to my interview, Greg got a phone call from the oncology office telling him that his cancer numbers were back up and he needed to go back on chemo, but they were like really spiking. So obviously, if you're in a cancer battle, that's not the news you want to get. But we got that news as I'm walking to the basement from my final
Wow.
interview.
Wow.
And I just kept saying, God, you're so awesome. Like this just proves to me that you're in the middle of this because there are all these distractions. But in spite of, I know that you have me and I'm going to look to you. And so if anything, that just propelled me because I started noticing a pattern. Like every time I'm at this moment, all these really intense and potentially devastating things keep happening, but they're not happening by mistake, right? And it's not happening to me, it's happening for me. You really have to change your mindset because life, if you let it, will beat you up constantly.
Yep.
So
that's really, really good. And that's not happening to me, happening for me. That is a profound statement. And that was going to be part of your journey. You and Greg met, you fell in love, you built a life together, and then you got the cancer diagnosis and you've overcome a lot of things, but that wasn't something you guys were able to overcome. So talk to me a little bit about being a mom, being a wife, and watching your husband, the love of your life, who you have built this life together, begin a struggle that he is unable to beat. Talk to me a little bit about that season of life, Nadine.
Well, Greg and I had our 3 children when I was at Big Law. So, working multiple hours a week, nursing because I nursed around the clock, putting kids to bed, writing memos, getting them back up, nursing in the middle of the night. Kind of crazy. I think that's why God allows you to have kids when you're young. I think about that now and I'm like, gosh, that was crazy. But I mean, why not? Right. It's so funny. Fully disclose the fact that my parents were divorced and I did not grow up in a home with 2 parents living side by side and didn't have an example of what it was like to have a marriage kind of garnered in Christ-like, belief systems and praying together. That was not anything I've ever seen. And growing up, if I can be candid, I never wanted to get married. I kind of thought, like, I'm going to be a New York lawyer and I'm going to live in this really nice apartment. And at night, I'm going to come home and I'm going to watch all the skylights, all over the New York skyline. And it's going to be great. And that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to have a little dog and I'm going to take it outside and it's going to be this big. And I was okay with that. Like my desire was never to fall in love or anything like that. But, that was the plan that God had for me. And so it's not easy for me to say that. Because for me to say that part is then for me to say that there was God's plan for him not to make it. And that's very humbling. And I've had to work on that and realize that lots of things. There are many things that we want in life that God doesn't have for us. And it's not, we don't get to choose and we don't get to question. I get to tell God I didn't understand. But being Greg's wife was really to date the greatest honor of my life. And at the very end, when he didn't make it, he was saying to me, in those weeks and stuff like that, he's like, I want to say I'm sorry. And I was like, sorry for what? And he's like, you have fought with me for 11 years and you have done everything with me. And I'm sure this wasn't the life that you had intended for yourself. And I had never thought for a moment ever in that battle this is not the life that I want. I just thought, how do we get to the other side? I never knew he was not going to make it until about 4 days before he passed away. Like in the whole fight, I never questioned it ever. And so, I got judged a lot in the end for that. I think the other side of the story is that at the very end, I had a lot of people who said a lot of really interesting things to me, and people will say things in your life
Yeah.
that will always surprise you. But being Greg's wife was the greatest honor of my life. And I'm so thankful that God chose me for that walk with him. And he was amazing. I always say that to say, people sometimes say when someone doesn't make it, oh my gosh, they were the best person. She was great. But
Mhm.
legitimately, he was awesome. And so, just being beside him, learning the lessons he taught me, seeing how he was resilient, always happy in spite of, it showed me that I had nothing to complain about. He never made me feel bad for the moments I did complain about whatever was going on in my life or whatever I thought was bothering me. And, God allowed me to have 5 healthy children when my plan wasn't to have any kids, wasn't something that I organically wanted. But I'm so thankful and I'm so excited, even though this walk has been very hard on my children, to see where God brings them and leads them and how this is all part of a bigger plan that an active participant in. So that will be interesting.
That is really good, Nadine. You meet Jesus at 13. You learn the word hope. Living what you've lived. What does the word hope mean to you now? When you hear the word hope with the life experiences that you've had, what does hope mean to you now?
I like to always give a visual, right? And so, you look back at little cartoons, you see like two little angel, one's an angel, one's a devil sitting on your shoulder. And so, after Greg passed away, that very traumatic, I lost a lot of my memory. That's a whole other conversation of how grief affects you and how you literally could die from a broken heart. And I've written a lot about it for people that have similarly gone through that or going through that so they know that they're not alone, because there weren't a lot of resources for me. He also died in COVID, which kind of impacted everything else. But when you think about hope, the times that I was like, okay, I'm going to be hopeful. And I had this angel sitting here. It's like, you can be hopeful. Like, God is good. God has you. And then the devil that's like, really? If God was so honorable and he's so awesome, then how could he let Greg die? And that was legitimately happening in my mind. And I just want to give you that visual. And that was something I battled with because I think because I gave my heart to God at such an early age, I've always had a Christ-like a young kid attitude and appreciation where I'm always hopeful, always praying, always thinking that something great is going to happen, to the point that when things happen, I'm always surprised many times. And I'm always like, because I think my expectation is for goodness and for good things. And I live my life like that. And being married to Greg, he always taught me it was glass half full, not glass half empty. And his perspective was always on the light side. And he was happy and always making jokes and always gave to others. It was such a perfect example of a man of God built on goodness and always wanting to help others. And so just having that experience in my life, I tried to take from it and learn from it, because even when we had nothing and our cancer bills were through the roof, we were helping with bills for his family members, or whenever he was practicing law, he did a lot of free law and charged very reduced rates because he wanted to help people. And his goal wasn't to just gain, he always wanted to give. And so those principles in life have, created and molded the way we raised our children, the way I continue to stand beside him as his wife and support him in those endeavors, how it has crafted my belief system, and how we have humbled ourselves to what God has planned for our lives then and now.
How did you get through those tough days? Those tough days when you probably had that white towel in your pocket of going, okay, this is too much. I'm out. I can't do this. I've got kids to raise. I'm trying to build a life. How did you get through those darkest days?
I never said I don't think I can do it until after he didn't make it. That was never something I said. I was always like, what can we do? I remember when we were looking for second line treatment. For those that are listening that are familiar with the cancer journey or not familiar with it, you originally treat where the cancer is found. So Greg had stage 4 colon cancer when he was diagnosed at age 36, 37. It was 2010. Which is unheard of. And so that's why he was misdiagnosed, because usually stage 4 colon cancer is not detected. And so I have a whole chapter in my book on like early colorectal cancer diagnosis and how that affects us today. But what's really interesting is that, I just always thought, what's the next cure? Like, what are we looking for? What can we do? And so I wrote, this was, over 10 years ago, 15 years ago at this point. And so I would look with the Mayo Clinic, we looked at MD Anderson, we looked at Emory, we went to Emory. They couldn't find where his cancer was moving next. By the blood work told us the cancer was moving. It showed the uptick in the cancer cells. So we knew it was there. Mayo, I never really pursued it. And then MD Anderson, I thought, I don't know why, I read the studies online. I thought this would be a good place. Wrote to them, sent him all the paperwork. They kept losing it. Then they had bad weather and they would shut down. After a while, I started to get antsy and I called them and I pleaded with them. And at the time, they never took electronic transfers of information with background documents. And they did. And Greg was taken into MD Anderson. And when he went, we connected with a really amazing oncologist who was a dear friend of mine named Kathy Ng, Dr. Kathy Ng. And so she met Greg. Greg, was really astute, smart, funny. He was a judge in Cobb County, still kept his practice. And she said to him, she was like, I know you're wondering where this cancer is, and we're going to find it. And so they found it. She put him on a treatment plan. And Greg said to me, can we afford for me to fly to Houston and get treatment? And I was like, if we have to get rid of our house, we are in the business of staying alive.
Yep.
And we will do what it takes. So I never once was like, we can't do this. I was just like, okay, what are we doing next? Whatever Greg did, whatever healthy concoction I made for him. I took, glass for glass with him. I'm in this with you forever. We did vegan camps. And he was, he was an semi-pro football player and loved to eat. So, and I was always on the healthier side than him rather. So the stuff I made him go through, he wasn't quite pleased, to put up with me. And I can be very convincing when I want something. So my goal was to uplift him and tell him that he could still do it. And what happened was when he traveled, I would stay home with the kids to keep their lives the same and balanced. And I obviously was the only one that was working. And even though it was hard, and even though there were times that, I'd get nervous, like when we were waiting for his PET scan, every 3 months we'd get a PET scan, every 2 weeks we get his blood work done. I was nervous waiting for those test results. And as the situation became more dire, we'd have more cancer spreading or whatever was up next on our plate. I think over time it started to affect me and I had a nervous stomach and things of that nature. But I never gave up and I'm thankful. I talk about my friends, I had really good friends and I had, certain family members that at the time were helpful and, we just kept pushing and kept praying. And I kept saying, God, there's nothing that you can't do. And I would listen to, sermons. I would have my scripture on. I would read, I would talk to God. And I spent a lot of time, really, it looked like a mirror of me back at 13, sitting in my room, listening to that Brooklyn Tabernacle tape and just talking to God and saying, God, if you can do this, you can do anything. And I was always hopeful in God, never gave up in him. Really, even until the day he passed away, I was always like, God, if this is something that you want to be different, you can. And I never gave up. And so that's why in the days that after Greg passed away were so hard for me. And I had that great temptation on my shoulder because that wasn't something I had in that fight. And I feel like when you're in a fight like that and you're uplifting your best friend, there's zero room for doubt. Like you're in the game, you're in the moment, you're all in. And I was all in all the time.
That happens. Did you lose any faith in the Lord? So Greg passes. He goes home to be with the Lord. You know what you believe, but yet there's still the struggle. How did you handle doubt? How did you handle God didn't answer my prayers the way that I wanted him to? How did you balance all that out, Nadine?
That's tough. I think it's always easy to believe when things are going great.
That's
or
right.
Maybe you have like a small battle and you're like, oh, it's resolved. God is good. But what about when you're in the trenches and it sucks and there's rain and there's mud and there's no visible way out? That's when your faith is tested and you're like, what am I supposed to do next? And I didn't fare very well because after Greg died and was gone, my friends were my friends and they were still there for me. But everyone has their life and you expect them to have their life. My expectation wasn't that everyone's going to just drop what they were going to do and be here with me and my kids. I had 5 kids, 3 of which were seriously struggling. And so then I'm introduced with I lost my best friend, I lost my husband, and I will tell you, he was my center. We created those kids together, but he was my number one. And our kids were together, our number two. And that's the way we had our family structured. So when he was gone, I literally felt like I was, don't, when they say you can die of a broken heart, like I was dying. I feel in many ways I did die and I did have to have a rebirth. And that's really, really hard when everything that you knew to be true was gone. And as I, alluded to earlier, I lost my memory. My short-term memory was gone. So I couldn't really work. And when I eventually went back to work and I would read memos that I wrote, I was like, this is good. I don't know who wrote this, but this is not me. Like, I really had no memory of writing it. I would write notes to myself on the fridge and stick it on the fridge. And I realized it was my handwriting. I had no recollection of writing that note. I had to set timers when I was in the kitchen because I would leave and forget there was food on the stove. Legitimate traumatic memory loss. And so after a while, I was like, do I want to do this anymore? Why am I living? Why am I here? And I thought about not being here and what that would look like, what I would do to not be here. And it was really real. And I just thought, everybody will be fine. I thought my 3 older kids were struggling. And I was like, but they knew enough of me and Greg, like maybe they would get through it. Like who would be there to stand in the gap for me if I was no longer here? And then, we had at the time a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I was like, they don't know me enough and they're not going to remember enough of Greg for them to fare well in life. And really, those were the lifelines that kept me here.
Wow. Wow.
It wasn't going to be fair to them for me to bow out. Like as much as I loved them more than I loved myself, and they're my reason for me sitting here with you today.
That's powerful. And, I heard Joni Eareckson Tada say this. She said, pain will introduce you to a Jesus you could have never known otherwise. What did you learn about Jesus through that journey that is different than if you hadn't walked through it? What did you learn about your faith during that? Looking back now, we're in the rearview mirror. We're looking back on it. What are some things you learned about Jesus and your faith that got you through that time?
God is always there. And I think that we have to realize that it's really not about what we want in life. I think God is gracious in giving us many things that we ask for. But I think that this life is not about our dreams, our career goals, our plans for our life. And I think it's about God's plan and us realizing and knowing Him and having union with Him. And I don't know what God has planned in this part 2 that I've already embarked on. But I think as it starts to unfold, I will see and it will be confirmed that everything in my life was for that very moment. And, it really is the epitome of laying down your cross, right? Like walking after God. And that it was really, really hard. And day to day, I just kept saying, okay, God, you know what? I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to make this one step. I'm going to make this one step. And God sends people to you in your time of need that you would never, ever imagine being there, right? Like there were people that I didn't even know that came into my life. At the time we were attending East Cobb North Point Ministries Church and they were helpful in many ways. But my day-to-day really help came from like Johnson's Ferry Baptist Church. They're right up the road. And there were all these older ladies that would sit with me and they would help me and they would pray with me. And then they gave me like a prayer, married couple, and they helped me. And then, of course, I became part of their widows group, which was interesting because everyone was much older than I was. And so they're in their 70s and they've had a full life. They have grandkids and they're like, you're 44 with 5 minor children. And they didn't really know how to help. But it was in those moments of grace where I would go to the drive-through prayers with like Noah in the backseat of the car seat and they would pray over us. And it was just those moments of needing to make it through day to day. And so when you're in a devastating occurrence and when you're on your knees, because it brings you to your knees like never before, if all you can do is get through it day to day and say, God, I just need to get through this moment in today. God will provide the people around you. If you just look up, He's always there. And one of my favorite poems is the Footprints in the Sand poem. And I just think back to that, like, we grew up really humbly, like I said, but my mom would, when she'd go to the West Indian market where we'd get our food, they would have like these poems and they were kind of wrapped up on a piece of paper. And so she always had it hanging down in front of the living room. And I used to always read it. I would sit there and I would eat because we had like a table, but we didn't have like 4 chairs. So we had like 3 chairs. And I would sit right here and I would read, and I would read the Footprints in the Sand poem. And I'd always read it and it just resonated with me. And so when Greg passed away, I went back to that poem and I was like, it's the time in need when you don't see those footprints in the sand. And knowing that, looking back now, just knowing that God was always there. And I'm so grateful that I didn't give up.
Yep.
Because I was right there, and I had like nothing, like I was broken. And I was like, if everything that I've known to be true to this very point in time is gone, how do I go on from here? And do I want to go on from there? And when I decided that I was going to try, I was like, you know what? I made a decision to want to be present for my younger children who did not know their dad, wouldn't remember, honestly, the way their older 3 would, and didn't have enough of my exposure on their life to fare well in what I thought would happen if I wasn't going to be here. So I decided that I was going to be here. I had to make that decision. And I think that you have to realize that I didn't feel like making that decision. I decided to make that decision. And once I decided to make that decision, then every day I took baby steps to get there. If you wait until you feel like it, you may never feel like it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you won't feel like it. And that's why I love those small intermediate steps. And I love that it was a group of people that could identify with your season, but they couldn't identify with your season. But yet their faithfulness and their presence was exactly what you needed. And you found love again. You are in a brand new season of life, married to Matt. And did you ever dream that would be on the horizon for you? And what has that provided you that you're thankful for?
So I always think that you have to be open to the possibility. I will tell you, I did get asked the question after Greg passed, would you ever get married again? People comically asked, would I have kids? I'm like, really? I think that I've populated the earth plenty. So that was always a negative. And I said, why would I get married again? I've had the greatest love of my life. I don't need to be married in that traditional sense. I already have children. I don't need someone to provide for me. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a hard worker. And I think I provided sufficiently for myself and my kids. I don't need anyone to be there for me. I was like, companionship would be fun because I'm an outgoing person and I love people. I was like, that'll be fun. And so I waited a long time to be open to the possibility of what's next in my life. And really, it came through the mouth of babes. My daughter would see me laying here on a Friday evening, and I'd be watching Netflix on my phone. And she's like, Mommy, you always sit here crying. And when are you going to stop crying? And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, we can all see you're crying. Your eyes are red. And she's like, why don't you go out and go do something? She's like, you're pretty. Why don't you get out and go do something? And I thought, okay, this is my little daughter talking to me. And I was like, okay. And I said, no one's going to replace your dad. And she's like, Mommy, no one's expecting you to replace that. So she gave me that freedom and that okay for me to go out and start meeting people. And so obviously this is not the place for it, but I would totally do a podcast on the whole dating scene in your 40s because that is completely insane. But the short end of it is that Matt and I met, and he and I started talking, having communication and talking on the phone. And he asked me to go out with him. And so I was like, okay, I'll go out with you. But he asked me to go out with him on the date that was the 3-year death anniversary of Greg. And so he didn't know that, right? And so I was like, what do I do? Do I tell him that date doesn't work well for me? Do I go? And if I go, are the kids going to have a hard time on that day? How will I feel leaving them? And then, but it begged the deeper questions, right? Was I really ready for a new beginning? Had I given myself permission to be with someone else? I mean, I've known Greg since I was 19. We grew up together. And there's that level of loyalty and commitment that was still in my heart for him. And I wanted to continue to honor him. When Greg died, I found on his computer, he'd written me a letter telling me that he would support me finding happiness again. And so that was freeing, that I knew that he would have given me his blessing, but I knew him, like the back of my hands, I knew him. So I knew that he would want me to be happy. But I didn't want myself to necessarily be happy with someone else. And That's real talk. Like, I was really loving Greg. And so anyway, that day, it was a Friday. Don't generally work on Fridays. I work a heavier Monday through Thursday week. And so took myself to lunch that day. I'm sitting there. I was like, okay, psyching myself up. Like, this will be fine. I could totally do this, whatever. I'm okay. And then my girlfriend called me to check on me. And I literally like pairs. And she's like, I know what today is, whatever. I have a good group of girlfriends that check in with me. And that were really just my rocks and helping me get through everything. And so anyway, so then that evening, Matt and I were planning to meet up. And the whole time I'm like, I can't do this. I'm like, if I text him and tell him that I can't make it, is he going to just, what is he going to think of me, whatever? So I'm driving myself over there. And the entire time I'm talking to myself, driving myself over there. And then I park and I'm walking and I'm like, I should just go back home. I should just tell him I'm not feeling well. Like, I'm legitimately talking to myself walking down the street, right? And I know people looking at me like, who is she talking to? Walk in this place that he recommended, which was coincidentally one of my favorite places to eat at the time. And I see him sitting there. He's at the bar, and it was a a nice restaurant. And he looks at me. He looks down at his phone. He starts smiling with me, and then he can totally tell I'm nervous. And then when I walked up, he gave me the biggest hug. And that was it. I mean, that was our first date. We were there for 4 hours. He was fun and wonderful. I had plans to follow me with my kids for spring break, and he was traveling for work. And so we got together that Sunday, 2 days later. And we went to a park and took a walk. And it was then that I was like, okay, there's something really special about him. And I mean, we were together ever since. So he's been wonderful. I always tell him that my favorite thing about him is his heart. He has the biggest heart in the world. And on that second date, he said to me, would you ever get remarried again? And I exhaled like a really long exhale. And I said, I want to be open to what God has for me. And that had taken a long time for me to get there, because I used to feel like I was a kid in a sandbox, and I would kick the sand and I would say, God, I don't get to question you. I don't get to question your ways because your ways aren't my ways. But I would just say, like, how could you take away a wonderful dad and a wonderful husband and such a good person in this world when we needed him so much? And my kids are dying, literally dying. Like, I don't understand how you could do this. And also, I didn't want a different life. Like, I wasn't like, I just want a different husband. I'm going to just start all over. This will be great. It's part 2 for me. I was very resistant to the possibility of being with someone else. And so when I answered Matt's question, like I said, I exhaled and I had to close my eyes because I had worked through myself at that very point. And I said, if you'd asked me this earlier, I would have said no. But I just want to be open to everything that God has for me and my children. And he's been wonderful. The interesting thing is that he was unlucky in love and had a lot of sadness in his life. And I'm still always amazed that he wanted to give it another chance. And he always said to me, everything that I've gone through was worth it because I always knew I would find you.
Wow.
And that in itself is a faith walk, that in spite of all the devastation and all the heartbreaks in his life, he still believed that God had his person for him. And so, and I say that because this has also really been hard for me to reconcile, that God would have this beautiful part 2, which I'm so grateful for, but he had it when I always wanted just my part 1.
Yep.
And being open to what God has consistently in your life, even when it's not what you had intended and hoped and prayed for. I think that's really where you put on your big girl pants. That's been really hard, Mike. Really, really hard for me. And I was all in, and I would have done a million years with him if God said, you get to choose. Do you want to go with Greg or do you want to stay here? If there wouldn't have been a thought, I would have gone with him in a second. But that wasn't what God had for
That's
me.
right.
I had to realize that, that wasn't my time. And God has something beautiful yet. And, it used to be a joke. Like, people would say to me, and I guess maybe it doesn't sound like a joke, but people would say to me, there's no way you're going to find someone beautiful like Greg. And no one ever finds true love. And you're never going to find it twice in a lifetime. And I was like, is that a challenge? And I would joke about it. But honestly, I couldn't have picked a more beautiful person for me or my kids. Matt is wonderful. And I always say he's like my beautiful boyfriend that I happen to marry. Everything that I've wanted and more. And I'm so lucky that I get to call him my best friend and my husband in this part 2. And I'm excited to see what God has for us and our family.
It's so neat because Romans 8:28 lived out has a lot of things you can't unwind in it, that God works good out of really bad stuff. And you can't get the good without the bad And it's the tapestry of God we can't unwind. We can't do it. Final question of the day. The Bible says David served his purpose in his generation, and then he fell asleep. He had a unique purpose crafted for just him. What do you think's the purpose God created you for? Why do you think when he created Nadine, he created you like he did? What do you think's the purpose you're created for? Why do you think he wants you here?
You were definitely a preacher. That is such a good question. Just 2 points woven together. Like you said, I went to law school at Vanderbilt Bible Belt, and I would be in church on Wednesday Bible study, and our pastor would say, "Who wants to, use their life for God?" And who wants to raise their hand? We ask people, not an altar call, but able to be used in the ministry. And I would literally look down like, oh my gosh, not me. I just want to go home and study for my, constitutional law test tomorrow. Like, I don't want to be special. I just want to go through life and just go through my life. And I've always done that. Like whenever I've ever felt this spirit leading me, I just kind of look down like, I think it's just going to just fly past me. Like, I'm not worried about it. What's been revealed to me is that everything that I really wanted Greg to do in his life, God also has for me. And I wanted him to tell his story, share his story, empower and lift up other people and, and all of those great things. But that wasn't what God had for him. And I really feel like God has that planned for me to do that work in my life right now. And so my purpose for my life is not what God's intended purpose is. And I think about, how we met and how we got introduced and how I would say that God leaves breadcrumbs. You just have to look at them and find them if you're looking for them. And I'm always looking for the breadcrumbs. I'm always looking for the connected tissues and thinking about Leadership Cobb and meeting Dana and, her asking me to speak at the Kennesaw Business Association luncheon and someone saying, hey, you should talk to her, you and I connecting. And then, Matt knowing of you from his previous life and just all the little connective, tissues and breadcrumbs that are there. You just follow them. And so I think God's purpose for my life is to encourage people, to lift them up, to let them know that they're not alone. You may not have a cancer battle. That may not be your particular story, but we all have battles and we need to share our stories of our ups and downs and the goodness of God because this is a day-to-day spiritual battle and this is a really hard life. And there's no way you get through it without not knowing God and having communion and union with other people that are faith believers and having a relationship where you open your mouth and you talk to God. And it could be you sitting in your car and not feeling great that day. And you say, God, I'm not feeling great. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm worried. I'm stressed. But it's as simple as that. And you don't have to be specially ordained to have a conversation with God. He's our creator. And he created us to have this need of wanting to be connected. And so many people try to fill it with other things, drugs, sex, porn, whatever. Food. We're all living in an addictive society, but he's the only thing that can quell our thirst. And, for me, my sadness, my depression, my grief left a big hole in my heart. And God has been the only person, the only entity, the only thing that has continued to fill me, lift me. And to be quite candid with you, in spite of my love and my happiness with Matt, I grieve.
That's
and
right.
I have hard days. And it sometimes hits me out of nowhere. And he has allowed me to grieve and love me in spite of that. And I'm a different person than I could ever have imagined me growing up in that little street of Albany Avenue in Brooklyn, New York, and listening to that book in Tabernacle Tape. But God has been faithful in every walk of my life. He has continued to be faithful. No, this is not the story that I ever would have written for my life, but I am thankful and grateful that I'm here right now and I have breath in my lungs and I'm excited about this beautiful road that God has laid out for me.
I don't know who today's story was for, but I think it was for somebody. It may not be all of you, but it was for somebody who is going, I don't know if I can make it, Mike. I don't know if I can get through what I'm going through. And you hear Nadine's story and you're like, if she can get through that, I can get through it, which is half the battle sometimes of just going, man, I can stick in there because when the night gets dark and the storm starts rolling in and you can't see the sun coming, that night gets tough. But Nadine's story tells us it's worth the effort to keep walking. God is with you. God is where you're going. Just hang on. Boy, Nadine, thank you for sharing your story with us. We may not have known you when we started, but I sure am glad that I know you now. It's tough. Well, we come back with another brand new episode. Like, we're going to be releasing an episode every Monday through the beginning of August. And so next week we have on Michael Daniel Blackaby talking about their brand new book, Straight to the Heart. You may know the name Blackaby from Experiencing God through his dad, their dad, Richard Blackaby, who's been on talking about spiritual leadership. And Mike and Daniel have written a great new book about connecting with this generation. So if you're an employer, if you work with 20-somethings and 30-somethings, man, this is a great episode because we talk to how to get to their heart. It's really, really good. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, man, leave a rating and review, share it with a friend. Biggest thing is subscribe. Just go to YouTube, go to Spotify, go to iTunes, wherever you listen from, and subscribe. You don't want to miss an episode. Some of the best ones may not be a name you know and you just skipped over, and they were exactly what you needed. So thanks again for joining me today. I want you to go love God, love people, live sent, and be the leader that you were created to be in the space and place He's put you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Linch with a Leader podcast with your host, Mike Linch. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help more people hear it by subscribing and leaving a review wherever you may be listening. For full episode notes and more spiritual leadership resources, visit MikeLynch.com.